Welcome to Audubon Pennington Park in Charlotte County, Florida. We are located at 1153 Alton Road in Port Charlotte. And Audubon is, Peace River Audubon Society is responsible for the management and maintenance of the property. Charlotte County is the owner of the property, and Peace River Audubon Society has a long-term lease with the county. This is the parking lot. It's a small parking lot, maybe 10 or 11 cars could fit in here. And so this is the entrance to the parking lot. There's some live oak trees that were planted here years ago that are looking pretty good. There's some doves taken off. And under the oak trees, we have some real healthy dune sunflowers. And these are good for birds. They like to, when the flower's deadhead, there's seeds there that birds can eat. Here's another batch of dune sunflowers. So the entrance is coming up to the park. It is a county park, so there are county rules, county ordinances, which are laws, and these are some of them. I'm not going to hold this too long. You could always freeze frame it if you want to read it in detail. It's just do's and don'ts. This is a sweet gum, mature sweet gum tree right by the entrance. It's really tall. And there's lots of smaller seed gum, seedlings and smaller ones sprouting up around it. We're still in a pandemic, so as long as we are, we need to follow the CDC guidelines about distancing, masks, washing hands, small groups, all those things that will protect us from getting sick. And we have another signage over here regarding no vehicles beyond this point and caution alligator habitat. In Florida, any place where there's water, there's a good chance, a good possibility of an alligator being present. This kiosk has some pamphlets. The blue one is regarding Audubon Pennington Park. It has a map. It has a description of all the major tree species and the background, the history. And then we have another pamphlet here, which is the Peace River Audubon Society Bird and Butterfly Sanctuary Certification Program. And what we are, attempting to do, what we would like to do is educate the public on how we could all create microhabitats in our own yards that would provide food, shelter, water for birds and butterflies and bees and other beneficial insects. Now, this is a butterfly garden. There's some scorpion tail, firebush, seaside goldenrod, and more dune sunflower, blanket flower, tropical sage, and kuntis, and other nectar plants that are good for butterflies. And over here is the map for the park. It's a loop, basically. The nature trail is a circle, and there's only one way in, one way out. So we start here and we'll end here. The trail length is 3/4 of a mile, so it's not very long, but it winds around and people tend to stop. There's benches, you could sit down, or you might stop and watch birds or other animals. And most people don't just run through here. There's 3 different habitats based on the elevation of the property. The highest elevation is the entrance, and we're going to see an oak hammock. And then when the elevation lowers halfway through, we're going to see a pine flatwood. And the lowest elevation, which is about water level, is the cypress swamp. We also have at the entrance here some very mature and very large bald cypress trees that typically grow in swamps. These are growing on the canal bank, and they have very extensive root structure with the knees, and that's a bald cypress. There's a lot more of them in the swamp. At the entrance of the park, this is the most narrow point. We have canals on both sides. We have this dead-end canal, which dead ends here at the park. And then on the other side, we have another canal. And this is called the Elkham Waterway. And what's unique about this park is we're surrounded by suburban homes. So just across the canal, you can see houses, the backyards of houses. And, you know, we're a kind of a wilderness nature park right in the heart of a neighborhood. This is a sugarberry tree. The majority of the park is a very dense canopy, which the birds love. The entrance area has probably more of an open canopy than the rest of the park. Up ahead, there's a bat box on top of a post. Here's one of our benches where people can sit. And park is maintained by volunteers from Peace River Audubon Society. We meet once a week, Wednesday mornings. We pick up trash, cigarette butts. We clear the trails if any branches have fallen down after a thunderstorm or a tropical storm or a hurricane. Anything that would block the trail, we remove it. There's a lot of people that like to come here and fish. This is a fishing spot here. It's used by a lot of people. And in here we have a bird garden, a demonstration bird garden that I'm not going to really talk about too much at this time. I'm going to create a separate video that will focus on that because otherwise this would be a very long video with the nature trail and the bird garden. Here's another area that people like to fish at. Oh, and I forgot to mention, it is June 19th, and it's 7:10 a.m. 2020 is the year. And I just wanted to point out this. One of the things that we do is maintain the trails, and sometimes through erosion or other factors, you know, we may have to do a little bit of work. So this trail was getting kind of worn out, and the more it was used and the more erosion was occurring, it was really getting washed out. And so we put in some oak logs that we sourced from the park, from fallen branches, and put in some, secured them with some wooden stakes that we recycled from some invasive Brazilian pepper trees that we cut down. And so now we have erosion control, and we also have some steps to make it a lot safer to walk up and down this path. So once again, this is the bird garden, the periphery of it. It's full of native plants that provide food for birds. Things like berries, fruits, seeds. And this property is certified as a bird and butterfly sanctuary by the Peace River Audubon Society because this property provides food, nectar, shelter, and a water source for birds, butterflies, and bees, insects, and other wildlife. We have a couple of bird baths in there, a brush pile, And okay, so the main trail starts here. There's really good signage as far as trail markers, and you're not really going to get lost here because everything is pretty, helpful with like all these main trail signs. So this is the main trail to the left, and this path here is where you're going to end up. When you walk the whole loop, you'll come out along that trail and right back to the entrance. It rained last night, so it's a little wet today. Now this is the best time of the day to come to look for birds. They tend to be more active early in the morning, around sunrise, a little after sunrise. They're a lot like us, they're sleeping at night, they're not eating, they wake up the next morning, they're hungry, and so they start flying around and look for food. This area is completely covered with air potato vines. These are invasive vines from Asia, and they are prolific. They are impossible to kill, but we do have some beetles that we always we can get from the University of Florida. Anybody can get them for free if you have air potato vines. But you can see the damage. This is what the beetles do. These air potato beetles come from the same region in Asia that the vines come from. And the vine is the only thing that those beetles will eat. So they do a really good job. They're just starting to emerge now. So it's going to take a few months for them to knock these back. But we did see a larva a couple of days ago, which is a really good sign. That means that the beetles have emerged from hibernation, from their winter hibernation, and they're starting to eat and reproduce. A female beetle can lay thousands of eggs during their 6-month lifespan. So we're going to see a huge increase in beetles emerging here and eating these leaves. So the beetles don't really completely kill the plant, but by eating it, they weaken it so much that it makes it hard for the vine to produce more of the bulbs that produce more vines next year. So they do a good job of weakening those vines. There's some more over here. And every winter we do a air potato roundup, because these vines will die back in the wintertime, and then we can see the potatoes on the ground and collect them. And we collect buckets and buckets and buckets of these things. You have to watch out for the roots here. I think they're real attractive and they're real interesting, but we have some very big trees, and big trees have big roots. So they're on the surface and above the surface in some cases. So you have to really kind of look down periodically. This is a junction where the main trail continues towards the left, but we have these shortcut trails. So if somebody doesn't really want to walk the entire trail, if they're too tired, or maybe they have to go somewhere, they have an appointment or something, and they're running late, so instead of doing the whole trail, they could just take a little side trail back to the main trail, back to the entrance. And this is a really beautiful part of the park. This is just covered with these huge ferns. You can hear a cardinal in the distance. These palms are sable palms or cabbage palms. There's lots of them in the park. They're probably the main palm tree here. And it's a native plant. It's actually the official state of Florida tree. And in the early days when the pioneers came here and they were trying to figure out what can you eat and what can't you eat, the Native Americans showed them that if you cut down the palm tree, you take the top of it where the new growth is, there's a section there that's tender enough to eat, and it's a starchy food source. And they call it swamp cabbage. So the sable palm also is called the cabbage palm for that reason. And we have another bench here. So there's not a lot of benches, but there's a few. And if people get tired or just want to rest a little bit, or maybe read a book, or just kind of hang out, there are some benches here and there spread out. This is a mulberry tree. It's mature, it's huge, it's old. There's some more erosion logs here, which act as steps. So this side trail ends here, and you can see the exit sign pointing back to the entrance. Oh, there's a rabbit. A little bunny here trying to hide. There's a lot of rabbits here. And we have otters that live here. They hunt here. They hunt armored catfish that live in the canal. And armored catfish are invasive. They're called plecos, and they were typically purchased at a pet store for an aquarium, and they're like an inch or two long when you do that, and they eat the algae on the glass, so the aquarium stays clean. And they're kind of cute, and but they grow and they get big, and they could get up to over a foot long. So what happens is people will dump them in the canals here, and then they become invasive. And they're armored because they literally have an armor plating around them. And the otters will catch them in the water and pull them up onto land to eat them. And they'll eat the flesh, they'll eat the eggs, and they'll just leave a hollow carcass behind. And that's something else the volunteers usually remove from the trails and dispose of. There's another bench. And there, over here, there's a really nice stand of elderberry. It's really healthy, it's tall. I mean, it must be 10 feet tall, and it's wide. And it's actually producing berries at this time, which the birds love. So these are the green ones here, in clusters. And then they're going to look like this when they're ripe. And these are edible, and people for decades have been using elderberry berries for jams, jellies, preserves, wine, syrup, and the birds, like I said, they love them. So really this whole park is technically a bird garden because there's just so much going on here that supports the birds, creates a nice habitat for them. But the demonstration garden back towards the entrance is educational for the public to come and look at and maybe get some ideas on how they could plant some plants like that in their yard or on their property, because it doesn't have to be a home. It could be a school, a church, it could be a government building, an office building, a shopping center that has landscaping. And there's just been such a huge loss of habitat since 1970. There was a study done in 2019 by a group of scientists. They looked at the bird population that year, and they concluded that since 1970, the North American bird population has decreased by 3 billion birds, primarily due to loss of habitat. Now, this is a beautyberry bush. This will produce these really nice purple berries. They're still flowering up here. Those will become the green berries there, and the green berries will ripen and turn a very dark purple. And those berries you can make jam from them, but it's like the old saying, if you add enough sugar to anything, it's going to taste good. So you don't want to eat them without lots of sweetener. And this is just an example of what the canopy looks like. Just lots of trees, lots of leaves. It's hard to see the birds in the summertime because the canopy is so thick, but in the wintertime, you see the migratory birds, and you can actually see them because the leaves thin out, and makes it a lot easier to find the birds up high and see them. Binoculars help. And the best time to come here in the summertime is early in the morning, not just to see the birds, but it's cooler. Makes a big difference. A lot of people come here, a lot of regulars will come here. Some people come here every day. Some people run here to get exercise. And especially since we're in the middle of this pandemic and we've been quarantining in the house, and most businesses were closed for a couple of months. It's just kind of nice to get out, to walk in the woods and get some fresh air. Now this tree is a snag, which is a dead tree, and a woodpecker. It was eating insects and carved out those holes there. So everything here gets recycled. If a tree falls, we just leave it alone. It'll decompose, it'll biodegrade, it'll provide nutrition for the soil that all the other plants benefit from. Now, it's funny because I see zebra butterflies in this area quite a bit, and most butterflies avoid the woods. They prefer open meadows and fields and sun. But the zebras come in here, and the only reason they do is they're looking for a place to lay their eggs, and they'll only lay their eggs on a passion vine. So there's a passion vine growing up this tree, and there's actually a passion fruit hanging from the vine. But the vine goes all the way up to the top. And so those butterflies know, where to go, how to find them. This is probably the largest opening in the canopy. I'm not sure why the trees don't grow there, but it is, for this park, that's a pretty big open space. Turtles will come up from the canals, and they like this soft sand. It's easy to dig into, and they'll actually lay their eggs on the trail, right on the path. They dig a trench, and then they drop their eggs in there. And some of them survive, but raccoons like to dig them up, and I think armadillos also are part of that as far as being predators for the eggs. So here's another signpost, main trail to the left, and the giant oak to the right. The giant oak is not a shortcut trail. It's just a short little trail that goes to this big oak tree. And we have southern red cedars here that are really beautiful. They're old, they're mature, they're tall. And there's about 5 of them in this little spot. And I'm always fascinated by the fact that right here we have wild grapevines growing, and around the tree you don't see any. It's just a clear spot of leaf litter and mulch. And over here it's the same thing, just obviously a blank spot where the vines don't grow. So my theory is that these trees produce something that keeps the weeds and the vines back from encroaching on it. And I'm not sure what that is exactly, but there's a term for that. I believe it's allelopathic, and that's when a tree produces something like a weed killer kind of naturally that suppresses anything encroaching on it. This little area here, these are called button bushes, and here's one that's actually blooming. Kind of strange looking little globes. They start off greenish and small like these, and then they will eventually put out that fluffy white covering like this one. And this is something that the birds will eat. Okay, this is the big oak. It's a massive live oak tree. Has Spanish moss. And thing about oaks, they will host over 500 different species of caterpillars, which makes them probably one of the best trees if you want to support butterflies and caterpillars. It's also good for birds because when the eggs hatch, the chicks need protein. So caterpillars are kind of the go-to food for the parent birds to gather and feed their young. And, so oak trees have lots of caterpillars on them, and a lot of different kinds of caterpillars. A ginkgo tree can host maybe 9 or 10 different species of caterpillars. So if you're planning for wildlife, you want to kind of do some research, make sure that you get the most bang for your buck, and have plants that are going to provide food and nectar for butterflies and birds. This is wild coffee over here, and these are starting to produce berries. A few weeks ago they had white flowers. The white flowers are real sweet smelling. These berries will go from green to dark purple, and it's another food for birds. And there's no caffeine in it. It's called wild coffee, but it's not really coffee. Here's another signpost, main trail and the exit. And this trail, at this point, the park is very narrow. I could walk this trail in 2 minutes and be on the other side of the park and on the trail back to the exit. So it's just another shortcut trail. So we'll just keep going down the main trail towards the cypress swamp. And this is right now the pine flatland. These are kuntis. Those are prehistoric plants that were here when the dinosaurs roamed the earth. And the kunti is the only native cycad for North America. There's lots of cycads, but that's the only one that's native. to us. So the canal's real close over on this side. This area has probably the most concentrated wild coffee in the whole park. We call it our coffee plantation. So here's more here. This is wild coffee. All of this is wild coffee. And as far back as you can see, this is all wild coffee. So it does really well in the shade. It's a good landscape plant for homes or other properties. So if you need to plant a bush or a tree, why not plant one that's going to produce some food for wildlife instead of something that's just an ornamental and really doesn't have any other benefit other than what it looks like. So this is the beginning of the cypress swamp. I saw a black racer here a couple of days ago right on this spot. It was probably 4 feet long. There's no venomous snakes here, but there's lots of black racers. And I have seen one corn snake here. So this is the lowest level of the park. So this is why it becomes so swampy. And it did just rain, so it gets a little muddy in the wet season, and the dry season is dry. So, and once again, watch out for roots. And down in here, there's cypress knees, these little things that poke up from the bald cypress roots, and they kind of cause a trip hazard. So you have to be careful. This is all bald cypress and willows and red maples in this area. This is a big red maple trunk that, as you look up, you can see the branches and the leaves. And the canopy really makes this area dark. I mean, it is really thick here. We found a hummingbird nest here in this area. It had fallen down onto the ground. There's another shortcut trail down that way, back to the main trail. And the hummingbird nest is made out of spider webs, and then the parent hummingbird will decorate it with little bits of moss or lichen and kind of camouflage it so it has like a little camo effect. Okay, this is getting kind of wet here. And you can see over here the swamp is starting to get full of water. Just in May, last month, this was dry. The swamp was dry. So you can see here, that's pretty swampy. We went into the swamp last year in May, and it was real dry. I don't know why, it just wasn't a lot of rain that year, but, I thought it would be muddy and mucky and smell bad. But the ground, once the water dries up, it's real spongy, almost like a peat bog. And it's like walking on a bounce house surface. It's real springy, and your feet don't sink into it. So definitely a swamp here. And this swamp will go back to the southern tip several hundred feet. And there's actually two little islands back there that rise up from the water. And but you can only access them by boat. It's a little hard to find the trail when it gets wet here in this section. There's more water, standing water over there. So it's a little buggy right now. There's some mosquitoes out. Not a lot. But in the summertime, I would recommend using mosquito spray. There's some real massive leather ferns over here in this section. It's just really interesting how there's just certain plants that will only grow in one spot in this park. But this is the spot where the leather ferns, and these are some of them are really huge. I mean, you can see them there. Really massive fronds. And these are all red maples. It's easy to identify red maple because it's got the traditional maple leaf. And look at the stem. It's red. It's a maple leaf. It's red. It's a red maple. So it's kind of no-brainer. For the most part, the people that I meet at this park are not just nice, but I mean, they're really kind of invested in this place. I mean, I've seen people here picking up trash, clearing the trail, just doing nice stuff to kind of make the park nice. You know, it's like they have ownership, I guess, because they come so frequently. This is how close our neighbors are. But it's beautiful. And there's fish in there. People like to fish. Lots of turtles. We also have gopher tortoises. There's at least 3 burrows that I've seen. And they seem to really like it here. They have kind of an unlimited food source. They mostly eat grass and greens, veggies. They'll eat fruit, flowers, and they really like the prickly pear cactus pads and the flower buds on those cactus plants. That's like a treat. So that's the end of the swamp. We're back to the main trail now, and the exit is to the left. This is a wider path. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call it a trail, but the fire department requires that we have this path, and it needs to be wide enough in the event of a wildfire where they would have to come here and put it out, and they would need to access it. Their vehicle would need to come through here, and they have a key to the lock at the entrance. There's a big steel post that prevents vehicles from coming in, but if you have the key, you can unlock it and pull the post out, and the fire truck can come in here and hopefully access where the fire is and put it out. And a lot of people come to this park, and this is their main trail they walk on. I mean, it's dry, it's sandy, it's, you know, I don't know. It's not as overgrown, I guess, as the main trail on the other side. There's some more ferns over here. This is just the other side of that fern patch that I showed earlier. So for a park located in a suburban neighborhood, right off of Peachland, between Midway and Peachland, but closer to Peachland, this is just a real accessible place, and it's practical for most people. You know, some people like to go to larger preserves where there's hundreds or even thousands of acres that they can meander around and spend maybe a day hiking, which is awesome for them. But I'd say for most people, this is probably a more doable, more practical, more realistic. And you can really connect with nature here, especially if you come here and sit on a bench. You know, if you're with a crowd of people, like you really shouldn't be with a crowd anyway, but because of the pandemic, but if you're with a big family or whatever, and everybody's chatting and laughing and stuff, you're not going to see any wildlife because they're going to hide. Now here's an example of a turtle nest that got poached by probably a raccoon. The canal's right over here, and these turtles climb up the bank and make the trek over here to the trail, and they dig in this soft sand and they bury these eggs. But a raccoon or an armadillo, it looks like, got them first. But they must miss some because there's a lot of turtles in the canal, a whole bunch. So I guess it's a numbers game. They lay a lot of eggs hoping some will survive. Now here's the oak hammock from the other side, and the same fern patch that we walked through earlier. There's the mulberry tree again. And there's another big oak tree. It has resurrection ferns growing on the branches, and they're really a fascinating fern because when it doesn't rain, they will dry up and look dead. They curl up, they turn brown, they just look dead. And they could be like that for months, and as soon as it rains again, within a day or two, they uncurl, they become green again. So that's why they're called resurrection fern. So here's another bench. This is a popular place to sit because it's closer to the entrance. There's more cabbage palm. This is my favorite oak tree here in the park. It's really old. I mean, you can see the size of the trunk over there. It's big. But you can't really appreciate it unless you get far enough away. And this is the best time of day, either now or sunset, because the light comes in at a sharp angle and it's like a spotlight. And when it hits the Spanish moss, it just kind of electrifies it and makes it look really bright and illuminated, and it's really interesting. There it is. And the other thing about this park is, I mean, I come here once a week, every week, all year long, and you see different things every time. It's just really weird. Oh, there's a cardinal. I just went into the bushes. You can see a little bit of red up there. That's the cardinal. And he's in the bird garden. That just flew away. So every time you come, you see different things. If it rains a lot, the fungi explode. I mean, you'll just see mushrooms everywhere, white ones, orange, red, yellow, I mean, all colors. And you come back a week later and they're all gone. And if it didn't rain anymore, they just dry up and they're gone. And you see plants pop up one week and they weren't there a week ago. So it's pretty amazing. And we're always, as a small group of 5 or 6, we all kind of look around, and if we, one person sees something interesting, they'll say, "Hey, what's this?" or "Take a look at that," or "Take a picture of this," and it's very educational. This tree here is a winged sumac. Last year they didn't do very well here. They just were not thriving for some reason, and then this one's actually getting ready to produce berries. This tip here, this will produce a big mass of dark red, small berries, which is another thing the birds will eat. This is a wax myrtle. We have a lot of those in the bird garden too. This is a native, and it will produce berries with a waxy coating, and the birds once again will eat those berries. The settlers that came to Florida in the early days learned that if you collect the berries from the wax myrtle and get a pot of boiling water, throw the berries in there, and the hot water will loosen the wax and separate it from the berries. And then they would make candles out of the wax, and those are called bayberry candles. They're scented naturally, and they have a somewhat of an anti-mosquito repellent effect. I hear a cardinal somewhere pretty close. So we're back at the entrance. Oh, it just flew away. So I highly recommend coming to this park. It's very charming. Like I said, it's really different in the wintertime compared to the summertime. And as far as birds, you're going to see a lot more birds in the wintertime because the trees drop some of their leaves, and you'll see migratory birds in the wintertime that are not here in the summertime. And just a lot of plants here, and it's just a great place to get some exercise, to learn about things, and just kind of relax, So thanks for watching, and the demonstration bird garden video will be coming soon.